Sencha caffeine falls somewhere in the middle when compared to high caffeine green teas like gyokuro and low caffeine green teas like bancha. In this video, we're going to explore why Sencha has caffeine and answer the question, how much caffeine is in Sencha green tea? We'll also take a look at how you can influence the caffeine content of a Sencha tea based on how you select and prepare the tea. Before we get started, it would really mean a lot to us if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for future tea videos. We have hundreds of videos on all sorts of topics related to Japanese green tea, but for this episode, we're going to focus on Sencha specifically. Without further ado, let's get started. So why does Sencha have caffeine? Before we explore the Sencha tea caffeine content, let's first answer the question of why Sencha has caffeine. The tea plant produces caffeine as a defense mechanism to protect itself from insects. Caffeine can be very bitter or even poisonous to small insects, so the tea plant builds a protective layer around the leaves so they are not as easy of a target. Why is the Sencha caffeine content so high? When people ask, does Sencha tea have a lot of caffeine, the answer requires some context. The Sencha caffeine content can be considered relatively high in the world of tea as a whole, but in the middle of the pack when it comes to Japanese green teas. It doesn't have as much caffeine as some of the heavy hitters like matcha, gyokuro, and kabusecha, but it does have more caffeine than hojicha, kokicha, bancha, and genmaicha. Sencha tends to have more caffeine than a typical teabag tea, both green and black. The reason why the Sencha tea caffeine content is so high has to do with how the tea is grown and harvested. While most Sencha teas are unshaded, there are a few that are covered in netting a week or more before the harvest. This will boost the caffeine levels slightly. In addition to shaded teas being higher in caffeine, teas made from the younger leaves will also pack a higher caffeine content. This is because the younger leaves are more tender and therefore more vulnerable to insects. The tea plant will produce more caffeine around the younger leaves compared to the tougher and more mature leaves in stems. These younger leaves are the sweetest in flavor and the richest in nutrients, so they are used in all the most sought-after Japanese teas like matcha, gyokuro, kabusecha, and of course, sencha. Older tea leaves are used to make low-caffeine teas like bancha, genmaicha, and hojicha, and the stems are used to make kokicha, another low-caffeine Japanese green tea. Now that we've mentioned how the Sencha caffeine content compares to some other types of Japanese green teas, let's briefly discuss each one. First, we have bancha. Bancha is made from the older leaves of the tea plant, which tend to be significantly lower in caffeine. For this reason, bancha is a popular choice as an afternoon or evening tea. It has a pleasant, mild flavor and a higher mineral content to help with digestion. Genmaicha is also lower in caffeine than sencha. This tea is not only made with older tea leaves, but also with little pieces of toasted rice. Because the rice doesn't contain any of its own caffeine, it lowers the overall caffeine content of the tea, while also adding a pleasant cereal flavor. Kokicha is another popular Japanese green tea that is quite low in caffeine. It's made with the stems of the tea plant, which only contain 1/3 the caffeine content of the leaves. Matcha, gyokuro, and kabusecha are higher in caffeine compared to sencha. Not only are these teas made from the youngest leaves of the tea plant, they are also shaded for weeks before the harvest. This also reduces the bitterness of the tea and increases the sweet and savory flavor. Gyokuro needs to be shaded for 3 weeks before the harvest, making it the highest caffeine green tea. So does sencha have a lot of caffeine? That all depends on what you compare it to. Now let's finally explore the caffeine content of sencha tea. Sencha can have anywhere between 40 to 60 milligrams of caffeine per serving, and that range will depend on the type of tea you use and how it's prepared. Teas like genmaicha can have as little as 12 milligrams per cup, and teas like gyokuro can have as much as 140 milligrams per serving, making sencha comfortably in the middle for a Japanese green tea. After learning how much caffeine is in sencha, we can now explore different things you can do to get a sencha that is higher or lower in caffeine. First, let's talk about cultivar. Some tea varieties or cultivars will have more caffeine than others. The common Yabukita cultivar will have less caffeine than a sencha made from the Saimidori cultivar, for example. So if you're looking for a higher caffeine tea, you can look for a Saimidori sencha, like this one from Mr. Henta. Next, we have the brewing. In the first brewing, you will get the highest amount of sencha caffeine. This is because you are stripping off the outer layer of the tea, which as we discussed before is where most of the caffeine is. But does sencha tea have caffeine in the second and third infusion? It does, but the caffeine will be significantly reduced. Temperature. The final factor that influences the sencha caffeine is the temperature of the brewing. Caffeine is one of the components in tea leaves that requires higher temperatures to extract. If you're using lower temperature water or cold water, the resulting brew will be much lower in caffeine. I hope this video has helped you answer the question, does sencha tea have caffeine? If you're interested in trying sencha tea for yourself, you can browse our excellent selection at neoteas.com. After traveling around Japan for the past few years, we've sampled hundreds of different sencha teas, and we've selected just a small handful of our favorites that we know you're going to love. When you order tea from us, you're not only helping to support this YouTube channel, you're also helping us to support the dozens of talented farmers we work with all around Japan. We hope that by sharing these farmers' stories and their teas with people all around the world, we can help to transition the tea industry into a more positive, sustainable direction. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you have any questions about sencha or green tea in general, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. Until then, we'll see you next time.